The wind of Ashmoor carried the scent of storm and prophecy. They said the kingdom itself had stopped breathing, its heartbeat trapped somewhere between thunder and silence. And at the center of that stillness was a girl who had never belonged, Elara Vane, 18 years old, wolfless, an omega born to a family that had long since fallen from grace. Her footsteps echoed in the corridor of the citadel, each one swallowed by whispers. The council had summoned her 3 nights ago, and from that moment, sleep had abandoned her. She had not been chosen for love, nor for honor, but for sacrifice. Stopped beyond the heavy doors of the great hall waited the dying Alpha King Kael Dravon of Ashmoor, a name spoken with reverence and fear. He had led the pack through wars, conquered 3 realms, and burned half the north to save the rest. But victory had cost him his wolf, torn from his soul by an ancient curse that left his body half alive and his spirit hollow. Now the council claimed the bond of marriage would restore balance. To everyone else, it meant only one thing: she would die so that he might live. The doors opened, and the hall rose like a cathedral of ghosts. Columns carved with running wolves glimmered in the torchlight, their eyes inset with amber that flickered as though alive. Hundreds stood watching, nobles, soldiers, priests, their faces a sea of quiet judgment. The scent of cedar smoke and rain filled the air. At the far end, upon a throne carved of blackwood and silver, sat the Alpha King. Even seated, he was a presence that silenced the hall. Broad shoulders cloaked in wolf fur, silver circlet resting upon hair dark as ash, eyes pale and hollowed by battle and years. His right hand gripped the armrest like a weapon. His left trembled faintly in his lap. When Elara entered, he did not look at her, not at first. He seemed lost somewhere between memory and pain. And yet, when her footsteps reached the center of the hall, his gaze lifted, and the world seemed to pause. He saw her, and for a fleeting heartbeat, something alive flickered behind those empty eyes. The officiant's voice rose, deep and old as stone. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the bond between wolf and mate, of how one life could kindle another. The words wrapped around her like a chain. Each vow felt heavier than the last dot. When he asked if she would bind, her lips barely moved. "I will." When he asked if the king would claim, Kael's voice cut through the silence, rough, deep, deliberate. "I will." It sounded less like a promise and more like a sentence passed. They brought forth the silver bowl, filled with the dark ceremonial wine. The officiant drew a blade of moonstone, its edge glinting like water under light. A drop of blood from her hand, a drop from his. The sound of the first drop striking the liquid was small, almost nothing, but the echo that followed shook the air. Elara gasped. Her vision blurred. Something cold and alive wrapped around her wrist, climbing up her arm like vines of frost. The torches dimmed, one by one, until only the light above the king's throne remained. Kael's body locked, his breath hitching. His fingers curled as though grasping for something unseen. And then, from deep within his chest, came a sound no one had heard in years. A low, feral growl that grew and grew until it broke into a roar. The wolf of Ashmoor had awakened. The crowd erupted into chaos. Priests shouted prayers. Soldiers drew blades. The hall trembled as shadows bled from the floor, twisting like smoke. Kael's eyes flared gold, bright and terrible. His power flooded outward, an invisible wave that sent the weaker to their knees. And through it all, Elara felt her knees buckle. Her strength drained like water spilling from a cracked vessel. She fell. The world tilted, her vision fading into streaks of light and noise. But before darkness claimed her, she felt a hand, warm, calloused, catch her. Kael's voice, raw and near, whispered something she barely heard. You shouldn't have come for me. When Elara woke, the world had changed. The once cold castle now burned with feverish energy, servants rushing, the council in frenzy, the Alpha alive again. She lay in a chamber wrapped in shadows, a fire glowing low at her bedside. Her body felt weightless and heavy all at once, as if she'd been emptied and refilled with smoke. The door creaked open. Kael stood there, not in robes of weakness, but armor of black leather, alive, strong, and yet his expression was not triumph. It was guilt. You should not move, he said. Voice like thunder, soft by hesitation. What happened? She whispered. He looked at his hands, unshaking now, steady, powerful. The bond restored me and me? She asked. Kael's jaw tightened. You paid the price. Silence. Only the fire crackled. He walked closer, stopping just short of her bedside. The scent of pine and smoke clung to him, the scent of life returning. I felt your heartbeat in mine, he said slowly, and then it faltered. He looked at her as though seeing the weight of what he'd stolen. I won't let you die. But even as he said it, her vision blurred again. Her fingers trembled and cold crept beneath her skin. The bond had made him whole and hollowed her in return. That night, Elara dreamt of a forest bathed in moonlight. A wolf, silver-eyed and massive, stood before her. Its breath came out as mist, its gaze piercing yet sorrowful. It stepped closer, pressing its nose to her palm. And when it spoke, its voice was Kael's. You are not my curse. You are my key. She woke with a scream, drenched in sweat. The moonlight through the window caught the veins in her wrist, glowing faintly, silver under her skin. And outside, somewhere deep in the woods, a howl answered. The next morning, the council gathered in the grand chamber. They praised the gods for Kael's revival, toasted to his strength, and spoke of unity. None mentioned the girl lying pale in the king's chambers. None noticed the strange shimmer that haunted her veins, but Kael did. He dismissed the healers, ignored the council, and sat beside her bed through the night. Sometimes she caught him staring, not with the hunger of a beast, but with the guilt of a man haunted by salvation. Why me? She asked once, her voice small. Kael's eyes, once gold with power, softened. Because you were the only one who still believed the throne could be saved. I never said that. You didn't have to. He rose, turning away, shoulders tense. I feel it, he murmured. Every time your heart stumbles, something inside me stirs, as if it wants to give itself back. He clenched his fists. But if I lose it again, this kingdom dies. Elara smiled faintly, the kind of smile born of exhaustion and defiance. Then maybe it deserves to. Outside, the storm broke. Thunder rolled across Ashmoor. The castle groaned beneath the weight of wind and prophecy. And in the highest tower, where moonlight cut through the darkness like a blade, two souls bound by blood began to unravel destiny itself. Neither the king nor the girl yet understood the truth, that what had awakened in that hall was not a curse at all, but the beginning of something older than magic, older than wolves, older than vows. Something that would burn the world, or save it. The night after the wedding never truly ended. It stretched, a thin, unbroken thread of darkness that refused to snap. Elara woke to the rhythm of rain striking stone, the echo of thunder rolling like distant drums. Her body ached, her skin felt too tight, her heart too tired. But worse than pain was the silence, for in that silence, she could hear him, not in words, not even in thoughts, but in pulse. Kael's heartbeat echoed faintly inside her own, steady and strong, when hers stumbled and weakened. The bond between them hadn't just been sealed, it had fused. One soul feeding the other, one life consuming the next. She turned her head and found him there, seated by the window, shadowed by stormlight. Armor half undone, his hair unbound, his gaze distant. The Alpha King of Ashmoor looked less like a ruler and more like a man who had been remade and didn't yet know how to exist. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, rough from silence. "I think so," she answered, her throat dry. "It doesn't feel like it." He turned toward her then, and for a moment she almost forgot to breathe. His eyes, gold and steady now, glowed faintly in the dim light. The sickness that once hollowed him was gone, replaced by something fierce, almost feral. "I told them you needed rest," he said, rising. "You told them I wasn't dying," she corrected softly. He froze, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Then slowly, "You aren't, not while I can stop it." "But you can't," she whispered. And he didn't argue, because he already knew. Days blurred into each other. The castle brimmed with celebration. The kingdom sang of rebirth. The Alpha had returned. But inside the king's tower, where time hung heavy, there was no joy, only guilt and silence. Kael spent hours pacing, studying old scrolls, arguing with priests who could not explain the impossible. He refused to leave her side for long. Sometimes when she drifted to sleep, she could feel him touch her hand, gently as though afraid to wake her. But it wasn't tenderness. It was testing, because every time his fingers brushed her skin, the mark between them pulsed, a faint silver vein that ran from his wrist to hers, glowing softly before. The curse was alive, and it was hungry. One evening, a healer named Ivan entered the chamber, trembling with scrolls in his arms. He bowed low, never meeting Kael's eyes. "My king." We found reference to something like this buried in the old tomes of the north. Kael's voice was sharp. "Speak. The ritual you performed, it matches the fragments of an ancient bond called the Hollow Binding. It was used once to restore a dying Alpha's wolf." He hesitated, sweat forming at his temples. "But it required a vessel." Elara's heart clenched. "A vessel?" The healer's gaze flicked to her. "Someone strong enough to contain what the Alpha lost." Kael's hand tightened around the edge of the table, wood creaking beneath his grip. "You mean she was chosen to die for it?" The man stammered. "It wasn't written that way, sire. It said the vessel becomes one with the Alpha's soul." Kael's voice dropped low, dark. "And if the vessel breaks?" The healer's silence was the only answer. That night, Kael stood outside her chamber, staring at the storm beyond the window. Rain blurred the glass. The world smelled of earth and lightning. He had faced armies and monsters, watched kingdoms burn, but never had he feared the ticking of a single heartbeat. He pressed his hand against his chest. He could feel her there, faint, fragile, beating with him. "Not beneath him," he whispered to the storm. "You will not take her." But storms never listened to kings. When Elara slept, she dreamed of forests on her own. Dreams where wolves walked between trees like ghosts. Dreams where the moon bled silver over snow, and a figure waited at the edge of a frozen lake, tall, cloaked, and familiar. She approached him through mist, her feet bare, her gown trailing frost. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer, not with words. He raised his head, and she saw Kael's face, but different. Younger, rawer, his eyes the color of molten gold. He reached out, pressing his palm to her heart. "Remember this," he said, his voice both hers and his. "The bond doesn't take, it transforms." And as his hand glowed, she woke gasping, her fingers clutching the mark on her wrist, burning bright as a star before fading to ash dot the next morning. Kael found her standing by the window, the dawn bleeding pale gold through the fog. "You shouldn't be on your feet," he said. "I dreamt of you," she murmured, not turning. "But it wasn't you. It was something inside you." He frowned. "The wolf, yes." Her voice was distant, as though remembering a melody she couldn't unhear. "He called me by another name, Lunareth." Kael froze. That word, Lunareth, hadn't been spoken aloud for centuries. It belonged to the Moon Guard, the ancient bloodline of women who once carried light magic, the only ones powerful enough to bond with wolves without losing themselves. But they had vanished long ago. "You are not meant to know that name," Kael said, his voice taut. "Then why do I?" She whispered. He had no answer. As the days passed, the sickness inside her grew worse. Sometimes she would cough and blood would shimmer, not red, but silver. Her eyes began to glow faintly in candlelight, veins tracing pale trails beneath her skin. The bond had begun rewriting her from within. Kael saw it happen and felt terror he could not command away. He ordered the council to seal the castle, forbade anyone from entering her chamber without his word. Rumors spread through Ashmoor, whispers of the cursed queen, of an alpha bound to a witch. The priests begged Kael to end it before it consumed them both. He ignored them. He could not kill the woman who was saving his soul with every breath. Late one night, Kael sat beside her as she drifted between fever and sleep. Her hand rested limply in his. He spoke quietly, the way men speak when they believe no one is listening. "I was ready to die," he said. "The curse was supposed to finish me. The gods know I deserved it. But they sent you instead." His voice faltered. "I wish I could believe it was mercy." Her eyes fluttered open, not fully, but enough to catch his words. "It wasn't mercy," she whispered. "It was choice." He looked at her, startled. "You think the gods chose you?" "No," she breathed. "I think I did." And before he could speak again, she was asleep. Outside, the moon climbed high, full, pale, watching. Kael left her chamber and descended the ancient spiral staircase into the heart of the citadel. Torches flickered, wind moaned through cracks in the walls. He entered the hidden sanctum, the place no king had walked in generations. The shelves were filled with scrolls bound in wolfskin, smelling of dust and time. He searched for hours until his fingers found a parchment, sealed with silver wax, marked by the sigil of a wolf beneath a moon. He broke it open and began to read. It told of a prophecy. When the Wolf King falls and the Moon Guard rises, the bond will awaken. One will burn to heal the other. Kael closed his eyes. His voice came out as a whisper to no one. "She wasn't chosen to save me. She was chosen to destroy the curse itself." When he returned to her, dawn was breaking. She was awake, sitting up weakly, the silver mark on her wrist pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. "What did you find?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Truth," he said. "And a lie big enough to drown kingdoms?" Her lips parted, but before she could question, the torches flickered, a tremor ran through the floor, and somewhere deep in the castle, a wolf howled. But this was no dream. Kael's body stiffened. The air grew heavy. The mark on his arm blazed like fire. Elara felt her breath catch as her own pulse began to race with his. Their connection flared, raw and violent, as if the curse itself had been waiting for this moment to break free. His eyes turned gold. Her veins glowed silver, and between them power surged, wild, unholy, and alive. The chamber walls shook. The candles snuffed out. Kael fell to his knees, gripping his chest, his breath ragged. Elara crawled to him, reaching out. "Kael." He caught her hand, voice hoarse. "Get back. It's waking again." But she didn't. She pressed her palm to his heart. A flash of light tore through the room, not blinding, but cleansing. The darkness that had clung to his soul hissed and retreated like a wounded beast. For a heartbeat, the wolf inside him howled, not in rage, but in recognition. And when the light faded, Kael was trembling, his eyes wet, his voice breaking. "What did you do?" Elara looked at her glowing hand and whispered, "I think I just stopped you from dying again." He stared at her, at the fragile, burning miracle before him, and in that moment, the curse no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like destiny in disguise, but destiny is cruel. For every life it gives, it takes something equal. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the light and warmth, a shadow began to stir, something ancient, waiting for its turn. The storm over Ashmoor didn't stop for 3 days. It raged as if the sky itself was grieving. Rain ran down the stone walls like tears, soaking the banners of the wolf sigil until they clung limp against the towers. Inside the citadel, time became a wound that refused to heal. Elara stayed awake through the thunder. Each crack of lightning painted her room in silver light, her reflection flashing pale in the mirror, veins faintly glowing, eyes brighter than they should be. The mark that bound her to Kael pulsed, steady and alive, like a second heart that did not belong to her. Something was changing inside her. She could feel it in her blood, her bones, her breath. Sometimes when she blinked, she could see faint shapes moving behind the veil of the world. Shadows that weren't shadows. And sometimes she could hear them whisper her name. Not Elara. Lunar Ite H. She didn't tell Kael at first. She didn't need to, because every time the whispers came, his body would tense, as though hearing an echo he couldn't locate. Their bond had become more than connection. It was communion. On the 4th night, Kael appeared at her door, his cloak damp with rain, his expression carved from exhaustion and resolve. "We're leaving," he said simply. "To where?" "Beneath the castle. To the archives." She frowned. "The archives were sealed centuries ago?" "Yes," he said, "by my ancestors, to hide what should never have been forgotten." He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. She followed him through the silent halls, torchlight flickering against wet stone. Every few steps he glanced at her, as if to make sure she could keep walking. Her body was still weak, but something stronger than pain was pulling her onward, curiosity, and the strange magnetic weight of destiny. They reached a wall at the end of a narrow corridor. Kael pressed his palm to the carved sigil of a wolf beneath a crescent moon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wall groaned and split apart, dust swirling as ancient air rushed through. A hidden staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The smell of old stone and forgotten ink filled her lungs. They descended by torchlight, the flames dancing as carvings of battles and beasts, wolves with eyes of flame, women cloaked in light, stars etched between their claws. Elara traced one with her fingers. "The moon guard," she whispered. Kael nodded. Once they walked beside alphas. They balanced power with purpose, until one tried to steal what belonged to the gods. His voice grew softer, as if confessing. That's when the curse began. They reached a vast chamber lined with shelves and broken relics. The air hummed with quiet power, not evil, not good, just ancient. At the center stood a massive stone table carved with runes. Kael set down the torch and began brushing dust from the surface. Symbols glimmered faintly beneath the grime, a circle, two intersecting lines, and in the center, the mark that matched the one on their wrists. "It's the same," she murmured. Kael nodded. This was written before the first Alpha ruled Ashmoor. It tells of a bond, one meant to unite two halves of a single soul. But something went wrong. He turned to her, eyes shadowed. The curse didn't destroy the bond. It corrupted it. Elara felt a chill creep down her spine. What does that mean? He looked at her hand, tracing the silver glow beneath her skin. It means it was never meant to take your life. It was meant to awaken something. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm above them, muffled and distant. Elara looked down at the glowing rune. What could it awaken? Kael hesitated. Then he pulled a worn scroll from a crack in the table, sealed with the mark of the moon guard. He broke the seal and unrolled it carefully. The ink shimmered faintly in the torchlight, alive, almost breathing. When the wolf is torn and the moon divided, he read aloud, "The chosen shall rise, half darkness, half dawn. The bond will call, and the world will bend. She will carry the Alpha's soul, and he her light." Elara's breath caught. It's talking about us. Kael's eyes met hers, gold and fierce and afraid all at once. No, it's warning us. Hours passed in the archives. They read, argued, and pieced together fragments of a history buried by time and fear. The first moon guard, Lunarith, had been both woman and light, born to tame the primal rage of wolves. But her power grew beyond the gods' control. They split her soul into two. One half became the first Alpha, the other became the line of women who would one day be her descendants. Elara touched her chest, where her heart beat too fast. So this power in me is the same light that once bound the first wolf, Kael finished. She laughed softly, not from humor, but disbelief. And now it's killing me. Kael turned away, his shoulders tense beneath his cloak. Because I took what wasn't mine. I should have died, not you. Elara stepped closer. Kael, look at me. He didn't, so she reached up and touched his face, her fingers cool against his jaw. You didn't take it. The bond chose me. His gaze met hers, raw, searching, desperate for denial. I won't lose you, he said, voice breaking. Not for prophecy, not for fate. And if fate doesn't ask, she whispered, then I'll defy it. Later that night, when the torches had burned low, they found another carving near the rear wall, a mural half erased by time. It showed a wolf kneeling before a woman wreathed in silver fire. But beneath the mural, someone had scrawled a phrase in a language older than the realm itself. Elara could barely read it, but when her fingers brushed the stone, the words flared to life, glowing white. Kael pulled her hand back, alarmed. "What did you do?" "I don't know," she breathed. "It called to me." The glow spread, tracing along the wall until a hidden doorway formed, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. The air that spilled out was cold, unnaturally so. "Elara, stay behind me." But she stepped forward anyway, the pull too strong to resist. Something inside that tunnel was calling her by name. Her true name, Lunar ETH. The tunnel led them to a circular chamber deep below the earth. At its center stood a mirror made of polished obsidian, rimmed in runes. It reflected neither torchlight nor shadow, only the person who looked into it and something standing behind them. Elara stepped closer. The air hummed, the bond mark on her wrist burning faintly. "Kael," she whispered. "It's reacting." He moved beside her, his reflection sharp and distorted. In the mirror, his eyes were not gold, they were feral red. And behind him, a massive wolf silhouette loomed, half-formed and watching. Kael flinched, stepping back. "It's the spirit," he muttered. "My Wolf." He pressed his hand to the glass, and the surface rippled like water. "Elara." "Don't," he started, but it was too late. She reached out too, her hand brushing his, and the mirror exploded in a storm of light. She was no longer in the chamber. She stood in a moonlit forest that smelled of pine and frost. Snowflakes drifted like ash around her. And there, across the clearing, stood Kael, but not Kael as she knew him. This one glowed faintly, his body half shadow, half light. His eyes blazed with the power of something untamed. "Elara," he said, and the sound of his voice shook the ground. "This is the truth of the bond." He stepped closer, every word trembling with both rage and grief. "When our blood met, you became the vessel not for my curse, but for my wolf. I no longer carry it. You do." Her heart lurched. "Then why am I dying?" "Because the human body cannot hold what was meant for gods." He looked at her then, truly looked, and the storm in his eyes softened. "But it can learn." He reached out his hand. "Let me show you." When their palms met, warmth flooded her body, fierce, unbearable, alive. Images flared behind her eyes. 1,000 lifetimes, 1,000 battles, wolves running through endless night. She saw Kael as a child, his first transformation, his first kill, his first command as Alpha. She saw the moment his wolf was torn away, the scream he never let the world hear. And through it all, one name echoed, Lunar ETH. When she opened her eyes again. She was back in the chamber, gasping, trembling, alive. Kael knelt beside her, his face pale with fear. "What happened?" he demanded. "I saw you," she whispered. "All of you. And the wolf. He's not your curse. He's your grief." Kael's breath caught. "Then what does that make you?" She looked at him, eyes glowing faintly silver. "His redemption." The torches flared, light chasing shadow. For the first time since the wedding, Kael smiled, a small broken thing that held both sorrow and hope. But before she could return it, the runes on the wall began to glow again, this time blood red. The ground trembled. The air thickened with power. Kael drew her close. "We woke something," he said. Elara's voice shook. "What?" "The curse," he whispered. "It's not a spell. It's alive, and now it knows your name. The night they returned from the catacombs, the moon hid behind clouds, as though even the heavens feared what had been unearthed below Ashmoor. Elara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mirror, saw the wolf behind Kael, saw the red glow, felt the pulse of something vast and alive watching her through the dark. The air inside the castle had changed since then. It felt heavier. Listening, Kael hadn't spoken much since they came back. He'd sealed the entrance to the archives himself, hands trembling as ancient stone folded back into place. Now he stood by the balcony, looking over the rain-slick kingdom, his cloak ghosting in the wind. "They'll come for you," he said quietly. "Who?" Elara asked, though deep down she already knew. "The council." His jaw tightened. "They've already started whispering. They think you bewitched me, that you've infected the throne with your curse." She gave a bitter smile. "Maybe they're right." Kael turned, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "No, you didn't curse me. You woke me." By dawn, the citadel was stirring, but not with the usual hum of servants and soldiers. It was a different sound, a restless one. Rumors moved like smoke through the corridors. Some said the queen was no longer human. Others said she walked in dreams and spoke to wolves. A few whispered that her blood glowed in moonlight, proof that the old gods had returned through her flesh. The council met in secret that morning, behind the heavy oak doors of the war room. 12 men, old, proud, and afraid. Their voices rose like the crackle of a dying fire. "She is not one of us," said Lord Tywin, his hands shaking with age and fear. "She carries witchlight," spat another. "And the king defends her," said a third. "He would let our kingdom." At the head of the table, Chancellor Mareth steepled his fingers. "Then," he said softly, "perhaps it is time we remind our king that no one rules forever." Elara woke to the sound of footsteps, too many. The door burst open before she could rise. 6 guards entered, followed by Lord Mareth himself. He bowed shallowly, but the gesture dripped with false respect. "My queen," he said. "The council requests your presence in the high chamber." Kael stepped into the room before she could answer, his eyes sharp. "You mean they summon her?" Mareth smiled dimly. "Call it what you will, Majesty. The people grow uneasy. They wish to see the woman who has stolen their king's soul." Kael took a step forward, voice low. "Careful, Chancellor. The last man who questioned my soul was buried with his tongue." The guards tensed. Elara placed a hand on Kael's arm, her touch gentle, steady. "It's fine," she said softly. "Let them see me." He turned to her, eyes dark with warning. "You don't know what they'll do." "I do," she whispered. "They'll do what men always do when they fear what they don't understand." The high chamber was filled when she entered, a sea of robes and armor, every eye trained on her like blades drawn in silence. The banners above fluttered in a strange, unfelt wind. Chancellor Mareth stood at the center, arms spread wide. "My lords and ladies," he announced, "we stand witness to the king's salvation and its cost." Elara walked forward, her pale gown trailing across the marble. Her hands were clasped calmly before her, but beneath the skin, silver light pulsed faintly, visible to all. Gasps rippled through the hall. "She doesn't deny it," someone hissed. "She flaunts it," said another. Mareth's smile widened. "Tell us, my queen, what manner of creature are you now?" Elara met his gaze, voice steady. "The kind that saved your king when your prayers failed." A murmur spread through the crowd, sharp and uneasy. Kael's hand found the hilt of his sword, but she shook her head. Marith took a slow step forward. And yet, since your binding, strange things have stirred in our lands. Wolves gathering at the borders, the moon bleeding red, the river running silver. If you are not a curse, then what are you? Elara felt the mark on her wrist throb, silver lines creeping up her arm. She took a breath. I am the balance your kind forgot, the voice your ancestors silenced. Her tone dropped, soft but cutting. I am what the gods made to remind you that power has a price. The room fell silent, and then Lord Tyvan stood, trembling with outrage. Enough. The witch speaks in riddles. Seize her before she damns us all. The guards moved forward. Kael's blade left its sheath in one clean, fluid motion. Touch her, he warned, and you won't leave this hall alive. Marith raised a hand. Your Majesty, please. But Kael's voice thundered, raw and wild. She is mine. The declaration silenced everything. Every breath. Every whisper. The only sound was the faint crackle of torches and the heartbeat in Elara's ears, but the damage was done. In that one moment, the council's fear turned to certainty. The king was no longer their king. He was hers. That night, the castle locked itself in quiet panic. Elara was confined to her chambers under the pretense of protection. Kael vanished, hunting for allies among those still loyal. Outside her window, the rain had stopped. The air hung heavy with mist, and from somewhere deep within the walls, a faint chanting echoed, the low, rhythmic hum of a ritual older than any crown. Elara rose, every instinct on edge. The sound wasn't from the chapel. It was below the council. She slipped from her room, the silver glow on her wrist dimmed beneath her cloak. The corridors were empty except for the ghostly flicker of torches. She followed the sound through the lower halls, down the servant stairs, past the storage vaults, until she reached the sealed passage that led to the catacombs. It was open. The air that spilled out was thick with smoke and incense. She stepped inside, her heartbeat quickening with each echoing footfall, and there, in the chamber of the archives, the council stood in a circle, chanting around the shattered mirror. Marith's voice rose above the others. By blood and by fear, we bind the cursed queen. Let the bond break, and the beast within her be caged. Elara stumbled forward. Stop. Every head turned. The chanting halted. Dotme Roth smiled coldly. You should not be here, my queen. What are you doing? She demanded. Saving our kingdom, he said. From you. He raised a dagger carved of moonstone, the same blade used in the binding. Your bond has infected our alpha, the only cure is separation. No, she whispered. You'll kill him, then so be it. A surge of light exploded from her palm before she even realized she'd moved. It struck the blade from his hand, sending it skidding across the floor. The council staggered back as silver fire rippled through the chamber. The runes on the walls flared to life, answering her fury, her fear. You have no idea what you're doing, she cried. The curse isn't meant to be broken, it's meant to be fulfilled. Marith sneered. And what would you know, witch? Her voice cracked like thunder. Because I am the prophecy you've been running from. The fire burst outward, throwing men to the ground. The shattered mirror behind them screamed with light, reflecting not her face, but the shadow of a wolf made of moonfire. Marith fell to his knees, his voice trembling. Gods preserve us. But there were no gods left in that room, only her. Then the echo of boots struck the floor above. Kael's voice roared through the tunnels. Elara. He appeared in the doorway, eyes blazing, cloak torn from running through the storm. He saw the scene, the council on the ground, the mirror burning, Elara standing amid silver light, and stopped, breathless. What have they done? He demanded. They tried to unbind us, she said, her voice trembling. But it's worse than that. They've woken it. The mirror cracked again, light spilling through its fractures like blood from a wound. The wolf's reflection moved on its own now, snarling, growing, breaking free. Kael grabbed her wrist. Run. The chamber collapsed behind them as they fled through the tunnels, stones shattering, dust choking the air. They emerged into the courtyard as dawn broke, red and wild, casting the castle in the color of fire. Kael turned, pulling her close. They'll come after us now. I know. They'll call you a monster. She looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. Then let them. Monsters remember what humans forget. He touched her cheek, thumb brushing the silver mark on her skin. Then we'll remind them together. Behind them, the citadel Ashmoor burned. The council's tower fell in on itself, devoured by the very magic they had tried to control. And in the wind, carried like a whisper through the valley, came the howl of something ancient, something reborn. The bond was no longer a secret. It was a declaration. The world would soon know that the king's curse had never been a curse at all. It was evolution. The forest swallowed them whole. Rain had long stopped, but the ground still wept. Their footsteps sank into mud and moss, the scent of smoke and iron clinging to their skin, the ghosts of the burning castle still chasing them through the mist. Elara didn't look back. She couldn't. Behind them, the kingdom of Ashmoor was falling, consumed not by war, but by fear. And ahead of them, beyond the dark trees and the whispering wind, waited the place she had seen 100 times in her dreams, the moon temple. They walked until their breath came in ragged clouds, until night fell and the forest began to hum. The world was different here, alive in a way that felt ancient, awake. The air shimmered faintly, as if touched by moonlight, even in the dark. Kael stopped beside a river that glowed silver, the light rippling over the surface like liquid stars. This place, he murmured, it shouldn't exist. Elara knelt, touching the water. It was cold, but not cruel. This is where it began, she whispered, where the first bond was made and broken. He crouched beside her, his reflection sharp and distorted in the water. You saw this in the vision. She nodded. The wolf showed me. The temple lies beyond that ridge. Kael looked at her, truly looked. Her eyes now glowed with faint light, veined silver beneath pale skin. And it terrified him, not because it was dangerous, but because he knew it was no longer entirely hers. They reached the ruins at dawn. The temple stood half buried in ivy and stone, its pillars cracked but still reaching skyward like pleading hands. Symbols of wolves and moons intertwined, carved deep into the marble, untouched by time. The air inside was heavy with silence, not the silence of absence, but of anticipation. Elara walked to the altar at the center, fingers tracing the old runes. They built this place to honor the bond, she said softly, and to contain it when it became too strong. Kael stepped closer. Contain? She met his gaze. The first Alpha and his Luna, they were too powerful. Their connection drew energy from the world itself. When she died, his rage broke the mountains. The gods called it love. The earth called it catastrophe. Kael's jaw clenched. And now we stand where they stood. Yes, she whispered, and the bond is waking again through us. A low wind moved through the ruins, stirring the dust and leaves. Kael turned his face toward it, the scent of pine and frost filling his lungs. He could feel the beast inside him, the wolf, pacing, restless, drawn to the woman before him like a tide to the moon. For weeks he had fought it, chained it, denied it. Now he wasn't sure if he could anymore. Elara, he said, voice rough, if we stay here, if we do what this place calls for, it will change us. Her voice trembled. It already has. He took her hand, and the bond pulsed between them, silver and gold light twisting together like veins of fire. She gasped, eyes wide. Kael, I feel it too, he said. The curse isn't feeding on you anymore. It's binding us tighter, merging what was never meant to be whole. He leaned closer, his breath a whisper against her skin. Tell me to stop, he murmured. But she didn't. Her hand rose, trembling, tracing the scars on his throat. The air thickened. The bond flared. And for the first time, the mark on both their wrists blazed in unison. One heartbeat. Two souls stopped when their lips met. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, the collision of two forces that had spent lifetimes orbiting in pain and finally found each other again. The world shuddered. The moonlight above broke into ribbons of white fire, spiraling through the ruins. Elara's body glowed, her veins flooding with light. Kael felt the wolf inside him roar, not in anger, but in recognition. The line between them blurred. Where he ended, she began. Where her breath faltered, his heart took over. Two beings, one pulse, and then the voice came again, the same one from her dreams, echoing through the chamber. When blood and moon unite, the curse shall find its truth. Elara's eyes flew open. Kael, what if this isn't meant to save us? What if it's meant to end us? He cupped her face, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Then we'll end together. The ground beneath the altar cracked, light spilling from the seams. From within the earth rose a faint hum, growing into a deep, resonant chant. Runes along the temple walls ignited one by one, gold, then red, then white. The Rwibr Ida Kael looked down at their joined hands. The bond mark burned, searing, alive. Elara, it's starting. She gasped as pain ripped through her chest. Her knees gave out, and Kael caught her before she fell. The light pouring from her wrist climbed up her arm, spreading across her skin like liquid flame. I can't, Kael. I can't hold it. Yes, you can. He pulled her against him, his hand over her heart. Let it come through. Don't fight it. Her body arched. A scream tore from her throat, but it wasn't only hers. From somewhere unseen, a second voice joined hers, low, guttural, wolfish. The sound shook the stones, rattled the air, and filled the forest beyond. The wolf was awakening. The storm returned, drawn by their bond. Wind howled through the broken temple, tearing at their clothes, their hair, their control. Elara's light grew so bright it burned through the mist. Kael's eyes turned molten gold, his fangs bared, claws raking the ground as his body trembled between man and beast. The curse wasn't killing them anymore. It was merging them, mind, heart, and spirit. She reached for him through the blinding light. Kael. He caught her hand, voice raw. Don't let go. I can't. Yes, you can. Look at me. She forced her eyes open, staring into the fury of his. You're not dying, he said through clenched teeth. You're becoming. The altar beneath them cracked open. Beneath the stone, a pool of liquid light pulsed, a mirror of the silver river outside. Kael understood without words. This is it, the heart of the curse. He drew the dagger from his belt, the same moonstone blade that had sealed their fates the night they wed. Elara's eyes widened. Kael, no. He shook his head. There's no other way. The bond feeds on balance. It gave me life and took yours. To end it, I have to give that life back. She grabbed his wrist, shaking. If you do this, you'll die. He smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I'll finally live the way I should have inside you. Her tears glowed silver. Don't you dare. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. I told you once, he whispered. You are not my curse, Elara. You are my cure. The blade flashed. Blood met light. The pool below them erupted, swallowing the altar in blinding radiance. Kael's body arched, the energy tearing through him, flooding into her. Elara screamed, clutching his hand, feeling his heartbeat fade even as hers grew stronger. The wolf's roar echoed through her veins, through the forest, through the sky itself. Every tree bent, every creature fell silent. The world itself paused to witness the end or the beginning. When the light dimmed, only Elara remained. She fell to her knees, the moonlight bathing her in silver. Kael's body lay still beside her, his face peaceful, the mark on his wrist now gone. Her sob broke the silence. Then something shifted, a warmth inside her chest, a whisper that wasn't hers. I'm here. Her eyes widened. She looked up at the moon, and for the first time, it didn't feel far away. The night was silent except for the slow rhythm of her breathing. She stood, unsteady but alive, her body thrumming with new strength. The mark on her wrist burned bright, reshaped, no longer a bond, but a sigil of unity. Half wolf, half light, half Kael, half Elara, the curse was broken. But in breaking it, something divine had been born. The last of the moonlight dripped from her fingers as she whispered into the night. Rest, my king, I'll carry your soul where the moon can't reach. The forest answered with a single howl, distant, mournful, eternal. And Elara Vane, once a wolfless girl, walked out of the ruins no longer mortal, no longer alone, but as the living echo of a love that defied gods. Dawn did not rise in the forest. It bled. A thin seam of pale light split the horizon as if the world itself had been cut open. The ruins of the moon temple smoked with silver mist. The altar collapsed into a broken mouth, drinking the last of the night. Elara stood amid the hush barefoot, luminous, breathing like someone woken from drowning. The pool of light beneath the shattered stone had gone still. The air tasted of iron and frost and something newly born. Kael lay at her feet. He looked more like a king in death than he ever had in life still. Unburdened, free of the weight that had carved its lines into his face. She knelt and pressed her forehead to his, and a warmth answered from inside her chest, soft, certain. Alive, I'm here. Tears slipped from her eyes, bright as quicksilver. Then we share this, she whispered. All of it. The bond marks had changed. The burned sigil on Kael's wrist had faded to ash. On her skin, the mark had taken new shape, half elf, half moon, joined at the throat. When she closed her eyes, She could feel the echo of his soul thrumming in the bone of her sternum, a steady anchoring beat. Not a ghost. Not an absence. A presence Kael's will braided into her own. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. Armor, voices, the scent of steel. They had found her. Elara rose without turning. The guards spread along the tree line, cloaks dark with dew, blades laid low. At their head came Rewrote the Beta, who had once sworn his life to Kael and then, in silence, to the woman the king would not let die. "Your Majesty," he said, not to the body, but to her. He had seen enough battlefields to know the difference between an ending and a coronation. Ashmoor burns. The council is broken. Mirror fled toward the eastern pass with 5 of his loyalists. The people, they are afraid. She looked over her shoulder. Of me, yes. A breath. And of what you'll do to those who did this? Elara glanced at Kael one last time. The echo in her chest tightened, then steady. Go. The warmth seemed to say, "I walk with you. Bring him," she said softly. "He will not be left to strangers or scavengers." The king returned. Rewrote nodded once. Orders snapped, hands moved. They wrapped Kael in the torn banners of the temple Volf, and moon entwined lifted him as a sacred weight, and followed their queen through the waking forest. When the city first saw her, it fell to its knees, not because of fear, because of recognition. Ashmoor knew its monsters. It knew its miracles, too. Elara crossed the great bridge with the river running silver beneath. The smoke from the council tower had thinned to a bruise-colored smear. People lined the streets, hunters, smiths, mothers with soot on their skirts and children with ash on their cheeks, watching the wolf-marked woman, who glowed like the edge of a blade. Behind her the king was carried, still and sovereign, and for the first time in a year the pack howled not in mourning, but in belonging. At the citadel gate, the Beta halted. "We can hold the hall," Rewrote said, "but Mirror has men buried like thorns among the guard. He will try to strike you before you speak." "I know," Elara said. Her eyes lifted to the black stone, to the banners hanging limp. "Let him." She entered the throne hall as a storm enters a valley quiet first, then altering pressure, then changing everything it touches. The nobles had gathered in ragged clusters, cloaks damp, faces drawn. Some bowed. Some could not move. The dais still bore the scar of the night she and Kael had bound their blood. Beside it stood the chair that had once held a dying man. Now it held no one. Elara did not climb the steps. "I am not here for height," she said, voice carrying without effort. "I am here for balance." The hall stilled, listening the way a forest listens when wolves choose where to run. "Kael Dravon is not gone." She laid a hand over her heart. The pulse thrummed like a drum. "He sacrificed his flesh to end the curse. His spirit lives here bound to mine, by vow and by will and by a ritual no council can name." A breath. "He chose this. I chose this. And the gods chose to bend." From the rear, a voice cut thin and sharp. "Blasphemy. Mirror." He stepped from the colonnade like a knife slipping from cloth half, a dozen armored men at either shoulder. His eyes were bright with sleeplessness and the cold fervor of a man who would rather burn the truth than be remade by it. "You are no queen," he said. "You are a vessel still, a mask stretched over witchfire. You consort with shades and call it law." Elara turned fully toward him. The air tightened. The torches leaned. "Chancellor," she said gently, As if addressing a frightened animal, you tried to break a living bond with a dead ritual. You woke something you cannot name, and you taught a kingdom to tremble at the woman who kept it breathing. He lifted his chin. Then end me and prove your mercy is a lie. Mercy, she said, is for the penitent. Her gaze slid to the man at his back, then to the balconies above where archers watched with hands sweating the strings. Justice is for the living. Marith smiled like ice. Then claim it. The first arrow sang dot and never reached her. The shaft struck air that had become stone, skated off a shimmer you could not see until it was there, a crescent of pale light blossoming in front of Elara's open hand. The barrier hummed one brief, perfect note, then vanished. Gasps rippled. The second arrow never came. Roran had moved as fast as a thought. Men cried out. Steel met bone, Marith lunged, dagger raised. Not for Elara, for the beer, the beta shouted. Feet pounded. The hall tilted toward catastrophe. Elara did not move. She simply remembered the way moonlight had gathered in her palms in the forest, the way despair had become a weapon when she had nothing else to give. She lifted both hands and drew in a breath that was not only hers. Something opened inside her like a gate, and through it poured the steady fury of an alpha who refused to let his dead be defiled. The sound that followed was not human. It rolled across the stones like thunder off cliff face. Men stumbled. Marith froze, blade an inch above the king's shrouded crown. Enough. Elara said. The word struck like law. The dagger fell from Marith's fingers. He turned slow, disbelieving, and met a gaze no man could hold for long. For a heartbeat he saw two faces layered, one over the other, the Queen of Ash and the King of Wolves, and he understood too late what the bond had become. Ran. He made it 3 steps. Roran dragged him down like gravity. The hall exhaled. Swords lowered. The shrouded beard did not move. In Elara's chest the echo eased, then steadied again as if Kael himself had nodded once and let the breath go. Bind him, Elara said. And the ones who cheered him on. Not in the dungeons. Her voice softened without losing edge. In the kitchens. In the kennels. In the places where hands remember the weight of service. Let them learn what power is for. Roran pressed fist to heart, as the crown commands. The crown, she said, quieter, commands mercy where fury would be easier. She looked toward the banners and the dark stone beyond. Kael would have given them exile. I choose a harder road, transformation. A murmur moved like a tide through the hall, uncertain, then gathering, then warm. No one cheered. Cheering was for victory. This was for breath. The bier was lifted once more. The procession unfurled. They carried the king through corridors lined with wolves carved in amber-eyed stone, past the window where storms learned their names, to a chamber sealed for a year and a day. The doors swung open on steel hinges. The hearth was laid, the sheets uncreased, the room heavy with the absence of a man who had not slept so much as endured. Elara stood at the threshold. Leave us, she said. When the guards withdrew, she crossed the floor alone. She unbound the banners, laid them carefully along the bed, then smoothed a palm over the cold fur collar at Kael's throat. The echo in her chest moved closer, filling her hands with warmth. Thank you, she whispered, to the man, to the wolf, to the vow that had remade the sky. Silence answered. But it did not feel empty. She dreamed without sleeping. A balcony. A valley breathing. Snow on far peaks like salt in a dark bowl. Kael leaned beside her, not in flesh, but in presence, the exact pressure of his shoulder, the exact shape of his breath when he refused to admit he was tired. We're not finished, he said, and she felt the smile in it. I know. The bond is balanced, but not set. The pack is unmoored. They must feel the pulse again through you. Teach me, she said, and the forest wind that had once carried his howl lifted her hair. You already know, he said. You always did. Walk the borders. Listen where men refuse to. Raise the wards. And when the moon is full, call me. She woke with the copper taste of power at the back of her tongue and the surety of orders stitched into her bones. For 7 nights, Elara walked Ashmoor as if tracing the veins of a sleeping giant. And wherever she went, the land grew quieter. She stood at the river, spoke a word, and the silver light sank, content to gleam beneath instead of glare above. She climbed the watch ridge, raised her hand and the old ward stones, remembered how to sing. She stood at the eastern pass where Mirth's riders had fled, and pressed her palm to the rock. When she lifted it away, the mountain wore the print like a seal. No enemy would slip through that throat without the land itself telling her. On the 8th night, the moon rose whole. The city gathered on rooftops and steps, in alleys and fields, listening for a sound they no longer dared hope to hear. Elara went to the highest balcony, the one that faced the dark line of the forest, and let the cold kiss her lungs until every breath she owned was honest. Kael Dravon, she said softly, and the bond inside her stood. She did not howl. She invited. A note left her chest and climbed the air, not the wild cry of a beast, but the pure tone of a bell struck in the exact center of a temple built long ago. It arced over rooftops. It slid between sleeping shutters. It touched the river and the ward stones and the distant ridge. From the forest, an answer came, not sound, but recognition, the kind a body has when a hand you love finds the back of your neck. Wolves lifted their heads and did not break into chaos. They listened. They bowed. Ashmoor did the same. In the hush after, Elara laid her palm over her heart. With me. She thought. Always, answered the warmth, and for the first time the ache in it was joy. But balance is not mercy, and it is never free. On the 12th day, scouts returned bloody, breathless, wild-eyed, rogues massing beyond the northern moors. Not a pack, a storm, drawn by rumor and the taste in the air when power changes hands. They want your crown, Roran said. No, Elara said, standing in the war room before a map that had never held her hands until now. They want my life. They smell what I carry and call it feast. Then we move first, he said, fierce and simple. Right at dawn, cut the head, break the body. Elara listened to the echo in her chest. It steadied her palm. It steadied the room. Roaring, she said, what happens if we ride and I fall? He flinched. Then he squared. Then Ashmoor rides again and again after that, until there is no again left. She smiled like a blade. She looked to the window where the moon would soon begin to thin. We ride at dusk, she said, when the world is deciding, when fear breaks easiest. Roran frowned. The men will ride to the sound of a promise, she finished, the wolf in her voice without growl, the light in her eyes without burn. That Ashmoor will not feed another's hunger again. She turned and the room rose with her. Not applause, alignment. Before dusk. She went alone to the king's chamber. I did not ask you to fight, she said to the quiet room, to the fur-draped bed, to the scar of a bite that had remade her soul. I ask you to remain. Stay where I can find you if the dark takes me. The echo came closer. It warmed her throat. It steadied her hands as she strapped on leather and clasped the simple silver circlet that had once worn a man and now chose a queen. Go, he said again. I'll keep the door open. She laughed once, surprised by its gentleness. Keep the door open, Kael, she whispered, and I'll bring the world home through it. They rode under a sky the color of bruised violets. Hooves drummed a heartbeat into the moor. The wind brought the rot-sweet stench of rogues, the old copper of blood, the breath of wolves who had taught themselves hunger until it ate their names. Elara lifted her palm. The guard loosened reins. The beta lowered his voice to a thread. Across the field, yellow eyes blinked like dying stars. A shape moved taller, thicker, scarred by a life spent chewing bone. The rogue alpha padded forward, hackles high, jaws wet, the promise of tearing in every step. He had heard of a dying king. He had heard of a hollow bride. He had come for easy meat and a crown his teeth could carry. Elara slid from the saddle. No armor gleamed on her. No jewels, only the sigil on her wrist and the silver in her eyes and the soft, impossible light that began to gather between her fingers as if dusk had decided to learn her name. You want what is mine, she said to the beast and to the men behind it and to fear itself. Come and take it. The rogue lunged dodged. She did not raise a shield this time. She opened the gate. Power did not explode. It unfolded, quiet, pitiless, clean as moonlight poured across the field in a low, rolling wave. It met the wolf mid-leap and did not burn him. It emptied him of hunger. He struck the ground not as a monster, but as an animal who had forgotten why he was running. Others crashed against that same soft force and tumbled back, jaws closing on nothing. The wave touched men and calmed their hands. It touched the horses and steadied their breath. It reached the beta and lit his eyes with a light he had not believed in since he was a boy. Elara stood with her palms still open and her face very still and felt the echo in her chest. Flood her. Fill her, hold her together while she gave away the part of herself that had once been absence and was now a river dot enough. Kael's warmth said when her knees began to shake, enough, she repeated aloud. The field stopped. The rogue alpha lay panting, thin steam lifting from his hide. The shape of violence melted from his jaw. He rose slow, met her gaze, and did the only thing left to a creature who has seen the edge and chosen to live. He backed away. One by one the others followed. Not exile. Return to whatever dens would still take them. The Moor exhaled. The horses stamped. Roran wiped a hand down his face like a man who had watched a blade pass through him and leave him taller. You didn't kill them, he said, wonder and a warrior's confusion stitching the words together. You unmade their hunger. Elara swayed. He caught her elbow and felt heat beneath her skin like banked embers. She managed a smile. Kael says I'm learning. Kael, Roran echoed, and did not look at the sky when he said it. They returned under stars that looked, at last, like they forgave the ground. The city met them with silence, and then with tears, and then with the sound a pack makes when its pulse comes home. On the balcony that night, Elara stood where she had, dreamed and breathed and vowed and almost broken, and she let the valley's quiet climb up to her like a tide. In her chest, two lives moved as one, no longer master and vessel, no longer curse and cure, partners, a crown that could not rest, a promise that did not know how to be small. "This is what your death bought," she said, and felt the warmth answer not as grief, but as belonging. "No," Kael said, and she could hear the smile again. "This is what your life chose." Elara closed her eyes. Below, Ashmoor slept. Above, the moon wore its whole face without shame. She laid her palm over the wolf and moon at her wrist and spoke softly into the night that had learned her voice. "Tomorrow," she said, "we build." The echo inside her nodded once. The way kings do when the battle is not ended, but the ground is finally ours. The war was over. But peace had teeth. Ashmoor slept, yet the land did not rest. The soil still remembered blood. The rivers still whispered names. And beneath the quiet surface of the rebuilt citadel, the old scars glowed faintly, silver and red, reminders of vows that had not been broken, only transformed. The queen walked those halls like someone the world had dreamed into being. Bare feet on cold stone, hair unbound, no crown except the faint shimmer of light that lived beneath her skin. When she passed, the torches bent toward her, as if the flame itself recognized its maker. Kael Dravon, the first wolf queen of Ashmoor. Half moonlight, half wild, all vowed her mornings began before the sun. She would rise with the fog and walk to the high terrace, where the kingdom stretched below her, forests reborn, rivers untamed, mountains still scarred but breathing. There she would stand, eyes closed, and listen to the heartbeat of the realm. Sometimes it was loud, the laughter of builders, the clatter of markets, the low hum of prayer. Sometimes it was quiet, the sigh of wind through pine, the rustle of wolves in their dens. Always she could feel him in it. Kael, not as a ghost, not as memory, as presence, the pulse beneath the world's new rhythm. His spirit moved in the soil, in the breath of every wolf that howled at the moon, in the steel of every sword that swore itself to her reign. She had not lost him. She had only learned to carry him differently. The council was gone, not slain, remade. Those who had once ruled by fear now built roads, tended fields, healed the sick. It was not punishment, but correction, a new law carved not in stone, but in mercy. When they came to her in chains, she did not judge them. She offered them shovels. "The land does not hate you," she told them. "It simply stopped recognizing you. Earn its memory back." And they did. Slowly, humbly, with blistered hands and lowered heads in their labor, Ashmoor found its redemption. Roran became her general loyal, steady, still calling her majesty, even when she told him not to. He rebuilt the pack into something not of rank, but of purpose. Warriors bound by choice, not blood. "Your rule is strange," he once told her with a grin. "No fear, no throne, no crown." She smiled back. "No chains either." He bowed. "Then it's a rule worth fighting for." At night, when the world hushed, she would climb to the highest tower, the same balcony where Kael once stood staring into storms, and open her hands to the sky. And always the wind would answer. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was warmth. Sometimes it was a shadow curling through her fingers like smoke before fading. Every time, it was him. Always, the wind said. "You carry both dawn and dusk now. Guard them well." Years passed. The stories of the cursed king and the wolfless bride became legend, then myth. Children grew up hearing of a queen whose blood glowed silver when she prayed, who tamed wolves with her voice and healed battlefields with her tears. They called her the Queen of Ash and Dawn, born of ruin, bearer of rebirth. But among the old, the truth was whispered differently. They said she was not one but two, that when the moon was full, another shadow walked beside her, tall and bright-eyed, guarding her steps. And when the night grew too still, they swore they could hear two hearts beating instead of one. On the 10th year after the fall of the curse, Elara stood once more at the edge of the Moon Temple ruins. The forest had claimed it back, ivy climbing the stone, wildflowers blooming through cracks. The pool of light had gone still, a mirror reflecting only the sky. She knelt, pressing her palm to the earth. "I did what you asked," she whispered. The world breathes again. The air trembled. A breeze stirred the grass, warm and familiar. "And you?" The wind asked. She smiled faintly. "I breathe too." "Then it's enough." For a moment she thought she saw him, standing by the broken altar, hair stirred by wind, eyes gold as ever, the ghost of a smile on his lips. And in that fleeting vision, she realized something deeper than grief. He had never been gone. He had only become everything Dot when she returned to the citadel. The night was thick with stars. The people were celebrating the festival of vows, candles lining the streets, songs echoing through the courtyards. Children painted wolves on the walls, moons on their hands. Lovers renewed their promises beneath the sky. Elara walked among them. Number crown, no guards, just a cloak of white fur over her shoulders, and the sound of joy following her like a tide. A little girl ran up to her, holding a candle too big for her hands. "Is it true?" the child asked, "that the moon listens to you?" Elara knelt, taking the girl's trembling fingers in her own. "The moon listens to all who speak with truth," she said softly. "Even small voices." The child grinned, and the candlelight reflected in Elara's silver eyes. "Then tell it thank you," the girl whispered, "for giving us back our king." Elara's smile faltered for just a breath. Then she leaned close. "The moon didn't give him back," she murmured. "He never left." Later, when the city slept and only the stars kept watch, Elara climbed once more to the tower balcony. Below her, Ashmoor glowed, not with torches, but with life. And above her, the moon burned full and kind, casting its silver blessing across the realm. She lifted her face to it, eyes wet, heart full. And from somewhere unseen, she heard the sound she had been waiting for, a howl, low, deep, and eternal. It carried across the valleys, through the woods, over the rivers. Every wolf in the kingdom raised its head and answered. Elara smiled, whispering through her tears, "I hear you, my king." And the wind replied not as words, but as warmth that wrapped her like arms, steady and endless, the kind that never truly lets go. Thus ended the curse of Ashmoor. The wolf and the moon were one again, and in the heart of a queen who had once been nothing, love became